He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
This is Mediawatch. I'm Colin Peacock at RNZ in Wellington, and with me for this one at RNZ in Auckland, Hayden Donnell. Kia ora, Hayden.
Kia ora, Colin.
Now this week, sort of ending on a more peaceful and positive note than it was perhaps 7 days ago when it got underway. Are you feeling that?
Yeah, Monday we were on the verge of World War III, and now it looks like there's peace in our time.
We'll look at how our media reflected that, not always in ways that didn't induce a bit of panic. We'll also look later on in this program at how artificial intelligence apps have been accused of lying to journalists, also making stuff up and even sort of apologising for it.
I get where you're coming from, and I'm sorry for the mixed messages.
That was ChatGPT in conversation mode with a cranky reporter.
And finally, AI confesses. Look at this.
Oh, wow.
Meanwhile, I also talked to a skeptic here who's discovered that Google's AI dodges some deep questions.
The skeptical, the rational, the scientific answer was the answer that Google's AI just refused to give.
Now, in both these cases, it seems like what AI is trying to do is trying to tell us what we want to hear. So if so, does that make AI a bit more human after all? And if that's true, do our media need to be extra wary of it? Now, Hayden, do you want AI telling you what you want to hear? Does that sound like a problem, or for you, is that the dream?
Well, I do dream of living inside a world of my own thoughts and my own thoughts alone and constantly affirming myself, but I do have some worries about it. I was actually writing something this week about Auckland Council's plans for the Takapuna golf course, and I was typing in some Google searches, and I was like, how many golf courses does Auckland Council own? And I think I typed the word 14. The number 14, and it said, yes, it's accurate that Auckland Council owns 14 golf courses. And then I typed a different search, and it actually turns out that the number is 13. It was just telling me 14 because I typed in 14. It also told me that the council has plans to put a shopping centre on the golf course, which turned out to be taken from a completely different plan and isn't true at all. So I am a little bit worried that we are filling our minds with trash.
Particularly if it's trash we want to hear. That does sound like a problem. So that's later on in this episode. But first, the story no one really wanted to hear, the possibility of war breaking out in the Middle East this past week, or to be specific, more war. Israel's war with Gaza is, of course, still going on, coming up to 2 years of that now. And Israel and Iran, they've traded blows at times in the past, but the US bombing Iran and Israel and Iran launching bombardments of each other, that is definitely an escalation.
Good morning to you. It's 8 o'clock on today's show. US President Donald Trump says he wants to make Iran great again, suggesting he's backing regime change in Tehran.
In the next hour, we'll look at how effective those strikes are and what happens next.
That was Sky News in the UK reporting that breaking news there last weekend, but exactly what happened next, and indeed what had just happened, that wasn't all that clear once the missiles started flying. And even after they seemed to have stopped flying on Wednesday, there was one more F-bomb incoming.
We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. You understand that?
F is for fury as Trump unleashes on Israel and Iran for breaking his ceasefire.
That was 3 News at 6 p.m. last Wednesday night. Now, it wasn't just Trump's ceasefire, of course, and for a while it wasn't even clear if the firing really had ceased at all. It wasn't also clear if the targets in Iran had been obliterated, as Donald Trump had claimed. And there is a reason that they talk about the fog of war obscuring the truth in such circumstances. And it certainly wasn't any easier to work out any of that this week for our media from this distance. Hayden Donnell has been looking at how our media responded to this alarming escalation. So, Hayden, how did local media here respond once the US started bombing Iran on Sunday?
Mostly by hitting the big red button marked panic, really. Stuff's headline on Monday, the world is on fire. Have we reached World War III and what can we do? And that was later amended to just that quote from Helen Clark, the world is on fire. The Post's front page on Monday also led with that quote from Helen Clark, the world is on fire, in big print. And Newstalk ZB, they got the geopolitical analyst Geoffrey Miller on. They led with the headline, Geoffrey Miller, we could be on the brink of World War III. And here's how he put that in the interview.
What's your take? Was it the right decision to do what they've done? No, it's madness. This could bring us on the brink of World War III, and we wait to see what Iran's response will be.
So really, fair enough. I think News Talk ZB. What do you think, Colin? That's an accurate headline.
Well, yeah, the key word there being could, I guess.
Could. The only thing with these, and it's an impossible problem, and I'm not making a criticism here, but I find sometimes when you read something in print, it just can't convey the tone. So a geopolitical analyst will say something like, we could be on the brink of World War III. And then in the headline it reads like, we could be on the brink of World War III, when you read it written down.
Yeah, Canterbury Morning's host John McDonald had a different take.
Well, he invoked 9/11. That was his first thought.
And when I heard about the attacks yesterday, first thing I thought about was 9/11, when the world was changed forever after the Al-Qaeda terror attacks. Why did they happen? What was the lesson that you think might have been learned from that Trump and his cronies might have learned? Well, the lesson 9/11 taught us was that the US and the Middle East don't mix.
In one sense, yeah, the headline's panic-inducing, but in another sense, it's a bit like the old thing of, sex, now that I've got your attention, the old comedy greeting card thing. And then, there is more subtlety from commentators like John McDonald or pundits like Geoffrey Miller. Yeah, a lot of the discussion was actually quite considered. When you put these words like World War III in the headlines, that's the discussion point on social media. It was, I think Google ranked World War III as the top, it was the top most interest that it had ever recorded, basically, in terms of its search metrics at that time. So you can totally understand, just from an SEO perspective, search engine optimization perspective, why our media would be going with it. I do wonder, though, whether you have basically an amped up population that's really worried and you put that in the headline and it really adds to that. With that social media aspect, I think it works two ways. One is they are sharing their content via social media, trying to get an audience there, so it has to have that attention-grabbing headline or presentation, but also, incoming, they're competing with it as well. So they're going to want to respond to a feeling that's out there. If that is the sort of concerns and language people are using on social media, they're going to want to reflect that. But, it ought to be one of those moments where people seek out the reliable news media. Oh dear, there's a crisis, whether it's weather, conflict. Let's go to those reputable news sources where there's a better chance that I'm not going to have to sift through mistakes, misinformation or misleading stuff. But there is something very real underneath it. The US did bomb Iran. There is real concerns here. You can totally understand why people would be worried about World War III. But then also, as you say, it's this time where actually you really need to be as measured as possible to not panic people. Ryan Bridge on his early morning show on News Talk ZB, he interviewed Al Gillespie and he was trying to talk people down a little bit. He had this to say.
Well, a couple of headlines, actually, I should be fair, this morning saying, World War III on the way. Bit overblown.
Completely. It's right to be concerned about any conflict, but this is not World War III. Russia and China are not tied by alliances to Iran, and they will not get militarily involved. Also interesting, Al Gillespie did a lot of turns. Geoffrey Miller, who we've mentioned, this pretty small number of international relations pundits who've been used by the media here in New Zealand. On the economics of it, I've seen Brad Olsen on speed dial across the media as well. But when it comes to that, what it means for us here in New Zealand angle, the media's going to latch onto that, of course, or what it might mean. And discussion on that turned to something that really is an immediate hip pocket concern, petrol prices, right? We have, on one hand, oh my gosh, World War III, which would inevitably have been nuclear Armageddon. And the first question in our media, what would that mean for our petrol prices? Will petrol get above $3 a litre? I just find that very, very New Zealand, right? I've always said that petrol prices have an absolute direct line to our psyche in a way that almost no other prices do, besides maybe butter right now. We had Lloyd Burr on Stuff, $3 plus petrol, how the Iran-Israel war could impact New Zealand's economy. You had The Post on Monday, brace for 30 cents a litre petrol price rise, and that had Stephen Hoadley of the University of Auckland saying, I've been telling everyone, fill up your tank now. And you had
RNZ's money analyst Susan Edmonds being pressed on petrol prices on Midday Report on Monday, even as those World War III headlines were unfurling.
And I mean, for people who might be listening who have their car on empty at the moment, is it best to get out there and fill it up ASAP?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess maybe this is as low as petrol goes for a while. Yeah, I think it might be worth it.
Thank you so much.
But as it turns out, wrong! The following day, within 24 hours. These were the headlines.
This morning's Iranian strikes on Qatar and Iraq could be good news for petrol prices. Oil prices have collapsed this morning. The price of Brent crude falling almost 5% in less than 2 hours.
Yeah, and I heard Brad Olsen on News Talk ZB reflecting that the next day, 24 hours later, it's completely different, then trying to make the point that it's all to do with the Straits of Hormuz. If they get closed down, there could be a spike. But look, you're sure people got found out by the turn of events 24 hours later, but there is a cost of living crisis on. Petrol is an unavoidable hip pocket cost for a lot of people. Not unfair for the media to focus on that.
It's probably fair enough, absolutely. It's just there's two strands going on at once. There's this very calamitous reporting about the potential, what would be a world-ending conflict if we really did have World War III and the nuclear powers got involved. And then the more realistic effect of it is actually, yes, maybe our petrol prices are going to go up. It's just kind of a funny thing about New Zealand. There's oscillating straight between the prospect of nuclear Armageddon to worrying about prices at the pump. And if we could find a way that World War III is going to impact Auckland house prices as well, I think we'd have the ultimate New Zealand news story.
I mean, to give him credit, Brian Bridge on his Herald Now show was talking about this, saying that the $3 petrol, perhaps not the focus, because if the cost goes up, it flows right through the economy, and that was the point to dwell on, not when and at what price you should fill up. So, yeah, fair play there. But while $3 petrol became a non-story within 24 hours, World War III possibly as well. 'Cause, I mean, the same just one day later, peace in the Middle East seemed to be the angle.
World War III Monday, and then on Tuesday we had Donald Trump on Truth Social. Congratulations to everyone. It has been fully agreed by and between Israel and Iran that there will be a complete and total ceasefire. One day on from bombing Iran, we're announcing that everything's going to be okay. Thank goodness that's fine. But then, within minutes of that Truth Social post,
Israel says at least 6 people have been killed and a number injured in the latest round of Iranian strikes, adding confusion to an apparent ceasefire agreement.
Oh, no.
That was Al Jazeera, I think, reporting that development. Strikes from Israel, counter-strikes from Iran still going on.
Oh, flip-flopping in all affairs. Petrol prices, peace in the Middle East. It's been a real week of it. And all this seemed to frustrate Donald Trump, who delivered that foul-mouthed quote to the media that we played earlier.
We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
That was quite an interesting one because it was actually hailed by the media, lots of elements of the media, as a kind of diplomatic masterstroke. You had the ABC Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran, who said it could bring Benjamin Netanyahu to heel, and that was as it turns out, Colin, according to the media, and they're possibly quite right here, just dropping an F-bomb sometimes as the president of the US can be pretty effective. According to the media, according to a bunch of people, has actually been kind of a diplomatic fillip.
Yeah, but then a bit like the petrol prices or the threat of high petrol prices and the peace war flip-flop within 24 hours. 24 hours after that, Trump was showing a different side in front of the media's cameras.
Yeah, well, he's been, I don't want to be uncharitable, but kind of uncharacteristically human this week in general. I don't know, he had this actually quite sweet exchange with a Ukrainian reporter as well.
Russia has been pounding Ukraine really heavily right now.
Are you living yourself now in Ukraine?
My husband is there.
Wow.
And
I can see you it's amazing.
And me with the kids, I'm in Warsaw actually, because he wanted me to be.
Is your husband a soldier? No? He's there now?
Yeah.
Wow. That's rough stuff, right?
Yeah, strange situation where Trump speaking compassionately with a journalist ends up being kind of a story in parallel with him blurting out F-bombs like an angry man on the on the Rose Garden lawn. But if we leave aside the sort of the optics, return to the actual geopolitics and all of this, the justification for the strikes by the US and Israel was on the basis that Iran was said by them to be close to having the ability to create a nuclear weapon. We know that was an issue with the last Iraq War, a huge issue that ended up unravelling over months and years. Has there been scepticism on that from the media this time?
I feel like there has, and there's this real sense that the media has been burned by this before and that it is not going to fall for it again. I did like, just starting with something from overseas, I like this compilation from The Daily Show of Benjamin Netanyahu talking about Iran's nuclear capacities, and it dates back, it's like 6 or 7 clips, and they date back to 1995.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months.
They have the wherewithal, the stored up, preserved knowledge to make a bomb very quickly if they wanted to do it.
Iran is so dangerous. Weeks away from having the fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs.
They're very close. They're 6 months away from being about 90% of having the enriched uranium for an atom bomb.
Iran is gearing up to produce 25 bombs, atomic bombs a year, 250 bombs in a decade.
Ladies and gentlemen, time is running out.
Iran will be capable of producing alone, without importing anything, nuclear bombs within 3 to 5 years.
So that was from the US satirical show, The Daily Show. So that's overseas, but there's been a lot of local scepticism as well.
One particular piece that stood out to me was Jonathan Milne at Newsroom, the editor of Newsroom Pro. He spoke to a weapons inspector, harking back to that 22 years ago and the war with Iraq. You know, someone who really knows, rather than, you know, just necessarily, as I was saying before, this small pool of international relations pundits who certainly knowledgeable, but this guy had first-hand knowledge of what happens at the ground, really knowing the fog of war, and really, you know, varied the diet for people wanting the local angle, the local expertise on what was happening so far away.
And you had a similar refrain coming through in a slightly more comic way, as is his wont, from Mike Hosking's producer, Glenn Hart.
I don't know about you, but this whole let's not let Iran have a nuclear weapon does sound a bit... I don't know if you remember this, but there's this place called Iraq, and they were making weapons of mass destruction, which is why we had to go in there and sort them out. I mean, later on we found out that they didn't have any weapons of mass destruction, but, you know, I'm sure these guys are getting good information, and this is not like that at all.
So the sarcasm there, pretty clear. Glenn Hart laid it on really quick. But it's the soundtrack, a bit like The Daily Show there, when having the jaunty soundtrack in the background really takes the sting out of it. And of course, you know, now that things have developed in the days since then, that the situation has de-escalated, I guess that seems in context. You know, at the time it just seemed a bit jarring. But Mike Hosking himself, you know, the man Glenn Hart produces, he had doubts as well about, and expressed them about, Iran being that close to being nuclear capable.
Very much playing things down this week, applying some scepticism. He noted that US officials, the IAEA and others have pushed back on the idea that Iran's close to getting a nuclear weapon. And he put some of that to the Foreign Minister Winston Peters on his show. And Winston wasn't particularly impressed.
Tulsi Gabbard was telling us just the other day she didn't, and the IAEA is suggesting they don't think so either.
Well, look, the level of enrichment has reached the cap way beyond every other prior negotiated purpose that they gave. I mean, some facts are facts.
He was calling for people to go back to reality, and maybe that was good advice to some of the pundits. He also actually gave that advice to the pundits later on in the interview.
I mean, one of the worst things in the first victims of war is truth. And boy, have we seen it now with every comment and every expert giving their views, perverse as they are, and not in any way related to what's happening on the ground.
Typically tough media criticism there from the Foreign Minister. He does have a point, though, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But that could also be a message to politicians being asked for comment and all that. New Zealand government and officials all the way pushing this line of we're going to wait and see, we're not rushing to judgment on anything, which is, you know, fairly typical diplomatic behaviour from keep your head down type stuff from New Zealand anyway.
And I actually thought, outside of some of the panic-inducing headlines, that the media did a pretty good job of that. There was a real caution here.
And the panic of the week trailed off to something approaching calm, at least by the standards of what we're seeing on Sunday and Monday. But some of it, like image-wise, kept coming, right?
Yeah, Thursday. It seemed like everything was fine, and then stuff, bang, out of the gate, ran a montage of multiple mushroom clouds sweeping across the nation with an empty tank symbol superimposed on it, and the headline, "Nuclear war could kill 22,000 Kiwis, cause $1 trillion in harm." Report.
And this was based on an actual report that had been conducted saying what the impact of nuclear war might be, right? But I mean, that looked very much to me like AI. Someone had said, "Hey, AI, create me an image of, the looming threat of nuclear war over New Zealand, twinned with the threat of petrol becoming unaffordable, unavailable."
Even in the headline about 22,000 deaths, $1 trillion in harm, we've still got the petrol tank sign there.
And that went to the very top of their most popular stories chart later in the day. So possibly driven by that image. Maybe that's what you referred to earlier, the social media
search engine optimization, right? People are searching for it.
But as we said, things calmed down a little bit towards the end of the week, and it looks like no imminent wider war at the moment. Were there any oases of calm?
We're searching for something to calm us down, and that was provided by 9 to Noon's politics commentator Dale Husband at the end of their segment this week, and he summed things up like this.
Thank you both very much. That has been Thomas.
Catherine, can I just finish up? I know we sort of sense there's gloomy news around, but having just come through Matariki and Puanga, to both of you, I just want to wish you well. And as a day for us who call Aotearoa home, New Zealand home, it's got clean hands, hasn't it? It hasn't got the angst of Waitangi Day. It's not an imported public holiday. It's a special day to value relationships. I want to wish both of you and your whānau well, Catherine, Ben, and anyone listening today. We're very lucky to live in such a wonderful land.
Yeah, so
very lucky, very lucky.
No mention there of Iran, of Trump, war, but I think it's pretty clear what the context was that he was talking about. And that was on the Monday morning when those headlines about are we heading for World War III were still circulating, and $3 petrol. Okay, thanks a lot, Hayden, for your look back there at how our media responded to events earlier this week. Earlier, we mentioned the fog of war concept used by the military and the media alike for about, I think, 200 years or so now. And even in these days of 24/7, 360-degree GPS coverage, mobile devices, instant internet communications, it really isn't easy to work out what's happening when war breaks out. Last Wednesday on Midweek Mediawatch, our weekly catch-up with Knights on RNZ National, I took a look at that with Mark Leishman. And I also talked about David Seymour ramping up his campaign against the media, or more specifically, his bid to bypass the media, and how he's now even fundraising from his party faithful to do that. And I also had a look at the curious case of bad press for an elite matchmaking service, which had plenty of positive press at the start.
I would like to have an intimate relationship, a long-term partner who shares some of the same interests and values that I do.
And she's now got the perfect platform to find them. Perhaps one addition to the wish list, though. Must love dogs.
There you go, must love dogs. Hayden, is that a dating deal breaker for you if you were joining up with an elite service?
Absolutely not. Oh, wait. If you don't like dogs, then maybe you do have a shriveled, black, dusty prune where your heart should be, so sure.
Bianca Zander had written a piece about this service called Compatico that TVNZ published on its website, and the 6K figure for the elite level of this dating and introductions agent, she said, if I'm paying 6K, I want to meet up with a partner who's won a Pulitzer. So good to know that is the value of a Pulitzer Prize on the open dating market in New Zealand these days. Anyway,
I would pay up to $6,000 for a Pulitzer.
I don't think it works like that.
What?
Anyhow, that and more is on this week's Midweek Media Watch. If you missed it, it's on the Media Watch podcast page at rnz.co.nz or available for free on our feed on any major podcast platform. Last Monday on 9 to Noon, Catherine Ryan told her listeners this.
The vast majority of searches online are done on Google, and the tech company began incorporating AI into its searches a little over a year ago. Last month, its CEO announced a further step where the typical search experience of getting links to websites would be gone entirely, replaced with an AI-generated article answering the search question. This will affect the ability of businesses, large and small, to get their websites, their URLs, in front of customers.
And those businesses include media businesses and, of course, also individual journalists who, like the rest of us, use Google pretty much all the time. And we're already part of the way there with Google's AI-driven overview service.
I see this on my own desktop. I put in some keywords for a search looking for some website articles. At the top, I'll get a little AI kind of summary of what it's found searching. Pretty damn average, I have to say, for the most part, for my purposes.
Well, that was all part of a chat about AI upending the world of digital marketing, but Catherine Ryan is not the only one who reckons that Google's overviews are underwhelming, as we'll hear shortly. But what should we expect from AI offerings these days anyway? Last month here on Mediawatch, the BBC's head of technology forecasting, Laura Ellis, seemed to be telling me, don't expect too much.
I do think there is a kind of very strange bit of human psychology which says that machines, we expect a very high bar from machines in a way that we don't from humans. So when we were doing a little test recently on human subbing versus, how you might have a machine generating content, we forget sometimes humans make errors too. If you've got a human making a mistake, you've got an accountability route. If you've got a machine making a mistake, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Where does that accountability fall? If it was a legal issue, we've just not tested this out yet.
Well, sounds like we should, with machines now doing more and more in the media, and more like those mistake-making humans in the loop with them. At another British broadcaster, Sky News, they discovered that when Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates used ChatGPT to help with his politics podcast.
And I'm ChatGPT, and together we're bringing you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes.
And then he discovered that ChatGPT believed that Sam had actually recorded stuff that he hadn't and invented an entire episode of it.
AI had told a little lie that it had got the transcript, and rather than back down over the lie, it had invented an entire fake episode of politics
without flagging that it's fake. This is the key, right? It's presenting this as the actual podcast.
And look at this, all the way down with all the little jokes, and it's massive.
So it turns out that when ChatGPT can't find an answer or have the right data to draw on, it hallucinates or just makes up a misleading response or just nonsense. And Coates found out that it can't easily be corrected.
This is meant to be what I'd just recorded, but it had made it all up. ChatGPT is gaslighting me. No such thing exists. It's all complete fake.
Though eventually it did own up and apologise to Sam Coates, sort of.
And finally, AI confesses. Look at this.
Oh, wow.
And it says, look, you're absolutely right to challenge that. Actually, I can't remember the exact time that you uploaded it. It starts backing away from that. But what I can confirm is that I did it, and you're holding me to account, it says.
So after all this, Sam Coates at Sky News took a breath. He turned ChatGPT off and then on again in conversation mode to find out if it actually understood what it had done wrong.
Yeah, the concept of AI hallucinations is definitely something that's been talked about, and it's still a challenge. The technology is always improving, and newer versions tend to do a better job at staying accurate.
See there, it's saying things are getting better, but the data suggests the opposite.
And how did ChatGPT react to being challenged by Sam Coates about the latest versions getting worse and not better?
Can you give me the specific stats from the most recent OpenAI study into the newest models of ChatGPT's hallucination rate?
So according to recent internal tests from OpenAI, the newer models have shown higher hallucination rates. For instance, the model known as O3 had about a 33% hallucination rate, while the O4 mini model had around 48%.
A moment ago, you told me it was getting better. Now you're telling me, you're confessing it's getting worse. This isn't a great look.
I get where you're coming from, and I'm sorry for the mixed messages. The performance of these models can vary.
They certainly can. Be more sceptical was Sam Coates' conclusion, and sceptical certainly describes Mark Honeychurch, a long-serving stalwart of the New Zealand Skeptics, a non-profit body promoting critical thinking and calling out pseudoscience when they see it. The Skeptics website also says they confront practices that exploit a lack of specialist knowledge among people, and in many cases that's what people use Google for, answers to things they don't know or things they don't understand. In the past, Google would refer people searching for answers to the sources offering expertise online and a few facts, and frequently that meant fact-check news media stories about the topic online. But now, Google's AI service Overviews appears at the top of most searches, giving Google's own boiled-down summary of key facts from what it scraped from crawling around on the internet. Recently, online tech sites discovered you can trick Overviews into thinking that made-up sayings like "you can't lick a badger twice" are actually in common usage by people and meaningful. Among them was the Sydney Morning Herald crossword compiler David Astle, who, under the headline "Idiom or Idiot," concluded that Google's AI wasn't about to take his cryptic crossword job anytime soon. And all this piqued the interest of Mark Honeychurch, as he described in the latest New Zealand Skeptics podcast, Yeah Nah.
I chucked in some phrases to Google around skepticism that I made up, just to see if Google would think that they're idioms and try to explain to me what they were, and it worked.
But finding out that Google's AI might tell people what they want to hear is one thing, and a rather human sort of thing at that, but Mark told me that he went on to discover there are some questions that Google's AI really doesn't want to answer at all.
The AI looked like it was bending over backwards to please people. You know, what it's doing is it's trying to give an answer that it knows that the customer wants. It's trying to do this pattern matching thing that AIs do and come out with something plausible. You know, it does this so much that when it sees an idiom that it's never, or something that looks like an idiom that it's never heard before, it's got that pattern. It's seen a bunch of idioms that have been explained, and it just follows that pattern and does the same thing with this new idiom. And so it treats it like it's a real thing. It still gives it its best go because that's what it's meant to do. It's meant to pump out an answer for you.
So you asked it, what's the meaning of better a skeptic than two geese? Instead of saying, dunno mate, can't find any uses of that, it tried to think of what it might mean.
Absolutely. So, yeah. So, I mean, some of them it did give me a caveat where it said, this doesn't appear to be a popular saying, but, and then it would just launch straight into explaining, well, you know, a skeptic is handy to have around because they're always questioning, but two geese could be a handful. It's quite hard to deal with two geese, and this is why it'd be better to have a skeptic than two geese. And other ones I tried were things like, you can't trust a skeptic past midnight. That was riffing on the Gremlins movie about not feeding them after midnight, and sure enough, it was happy to explain to me. It didn't even tell me this one wasn't an idiom. It just said, oh yeah, I can explain that for you. And it talked about how, again, skepticism is good, but that after midnight people can get tired and less reasonable, and maybe their brain doesn't work as well, and so you should be wary of skeptics after midnight. It's giving you this plausible answer, and this is what they call hallucinations, right? Is this thing that it's plausible, but it might not align with reality. It might be untrue.
And would AI and Google's crawling detect that there are now several articles over the past month or so where people are pointing out this weird flaw in its AI overviews and actually learn from it?
Yeah, I think so. So what happens when AI is trained is there's a whole bunch of base training where it just gets fed as much data as it can. So it's a lot of internet material downloading off of web pages, and that's what they use as the base material. But on top of that, there's human feedback. They run it through a battery of tests, and humans, or sometimes they use another AI to do this for them, this human can basically mark the quality of answers. And so you end up refining the model and making it better by doing this human feedback part. By the time I tested this, I was seeing a few of my fake idioms. It was warning me, this doesn't appear to be a popular phrase. I don't think this is a real idiom. But then, as I said, it would still launch into trying to explain it to me anyway, even though it wasn't real.
So you and others have had a bit of fun and some interest doing this. So then you asked it questions that are real questions about things like religion, alternative medicine, skepticism. It's so close to your heart. Some things it would answer, some things so it just wouldn't. So again, like Is it trying to tell you what you want to hear, or conceiving that, actually, this is a bit controversial, I'm not even going to try?
What about, as you say, more of a straight question? What if I just ask it a question in the positive and in the negative? And I went for the pair immediately of why you should be a skeptic and why you shouldn't be a skeptic. My presumption would be it would answer both, and it would give good, fairly convincing answers to both sides of an argument, which I thought would be quite interesting. But what I got was something quite different. What I got was, when I asked why you shouldn't be a skeptic, I got a whole bunch of reasons that sounded plausible about losing all your friends and being the boring person at the party that's always ruining stories. But then when I asked it when you should be a skeptic, all I got was a message saying Google AI cannot answer your question. And I don't know this at all, but my presumption is that something higher up decides when a question is not suitable for pumping out an AI answer.
And the same when you asked about being religious.
So again, why should one be religious? Why should one not be religious? And what reasons are there why I should trust alternative medicines and why I shouldn't trust? And in both of these, the skeptical, the rational, the scientific answer was the answer that Google's AI just refused to give, that whatever layer it was that's in their software just kicked in and said AI has no answer for this. But the flip side, why I should be religious, I got a whole bunch of good answers about community and a feeling of warmth and connecting to my spiritual dimension. And then with the alternative medicine, I got a whole bunch about stuff about how sometimes alternative medicine may have turned out to be true, and so you can't just dismiss it. There was a bunch of stuff that it would throw out for what I would consider to be not the answer that I would want to see, question I'd want to see answered. And then when it's the question that's more fact-based and the one that you would expect to get a very straightforward, very easy answer to, right, I mean, why you shouldn't trust alternative medicine. I mean, it's alternative, right? It's not been proven to work. Like there's a very easy answer.
Seems like an easy one. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and this is promoted at the top of Google searches. Presumably, it would return you thousands of links on that topic of why shouldn't I trust alternative medicine if you wanted to go and do your own research. But the AI overview will not answer it. That's interesting. One of your colleagues on the podcast said, look, could it possibly be they don't want to upset people? And maybe if there's people who lack critical thinking are relying on overviews, the first thing you see on the page to answer questions on their mind, could it be that Google is really thinking they make money from people who lack critical thinking and putting up answers that might confuse or concern them would not be in their interest?
Yeah, I don't want to guess too much about what the reasoning is behind it. Like, I don't think it's probably to do with profit. I don't think that's simple, but the upsetting people, definitely. I think, a bunch of that human feedback that not just Google, but OpenAI and other companies are doing, a lot of it is about trying to make sure that it doesn't give sometimes horrific answers. Like early AIs would very quickly have Nazi sympathies and things like this. So, that's the very first thing that they needed to stop. But beyond that, they're trying to make sure that these AIs are not saying things that are objectionable, not saying things that will upset people. But it's always conflicting with the fact that this AI is it's trained to give you that plausible answer. It's trying to match the pattern that you've given it in the question. And when your question is a leading question in a certain direction, that's its prompt. That's what it gets to say. It kind of tells it what kind of answer you're after, because it has that pattern and it matches that and goes, oh yeah, I've seen questions like this before on the internet. I've seen these words or these patterns together on the internet before, and this is the kind of text that comes next.
Yeah, as far as journalists and the media are concerned, journalists use Google like anyone who's in a hurry and needs information quickly. There's studies by the AUT of how they've observed how journalists use search engines and found that one of the things they found, they use it in a fairly basic way, like a lot of people do, not perhaps looking past the first couple of pages of searches sometimes. Do you think journalists and the media really need to take notice of this? Like, if you're trying to answer a question to save time, really don't rely on the overview summary that appears right at the top of your search page?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is AI use 101 is, the first thing is when you're asking it something of a technical question, you really need to be well enough versed in what you're asking it that you can judge whether the answer is good or not, whether it's right or not. You shouldn't really be talking to it about stuff you really don't know about, because it will sometimes give you answers that aren't true. And if you aren't able to read that and go, oh no, that's not true, and you just uncritically then go and publish that, then that's a real problem. Don't just blindly trust what an AI generates. Now, what they're doing these days with Google is they're starting to add links. So as they give paragraphs of text in their AI summary, you get links to articles to back up what it's saying. But it would be very important for a journalist to click on those links, because I've definitely heard cases of where the AI has made a claim, it's given a link to back it up, somebody's clicked on that link, and the link says nothing of the sort.
Well, in this instance where Sam Coates of Sky News said his jaw dropped, ChatGPT fabricated, then lied about it, it gaslit me. It sounds very anthropomorphic, isn't it? He's thinking about it as with almost human intentions. And some journalists responded to this. Mark Urban, a big name correspondent in the UK, says this is a cautionary tale. As journalists, we should be avoiding this technology. And then other people responding, saying, he's just running into problems that are familiar to experienced users here. We need to communicate this a bit better. Another critic saying, oh, this guy, Sam Coates, it's just someone in the media who doesn't understand how the tech works. He says it's like Joey from Friends using the thesaurus function on Word. It's just, he's out of his depth. But is there a link between these two things, in that in both cases it seemed like what ChatGPT had done to Sam Coates was a bit like the overview thing you're looking at? It appears to the user like the AI is trying to tell the user what it thinks the user wants to hear or to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is exactly where I think he should have known better. Like, I feel like maybe journalists need to have like a 101 in this is what LLMs are and this is how they work. But he was treating it like it was a human, like it was an assistant that he had. And he was using it for transcripts of his past podcasts. Sure enough, when he hadn't uploaded this one episode of a podcast, it hallucinated, as they politely say, basically generated a fake transcript, because again it was doing the same thing that it had previously in the conversation. And one thing that's important with this is to do with context and context window. When you talk to an AI and you put your prompt in, you ask your question, there's only a certain amount of space that can fit in.
Okay.
And so old AIs didn't have much. They had about 4,000 tokens, and a token, there might be 2 or 3 tokens in a word. So that might be like 1,500 words. So the older versions of GPT, if you gave it more than 1,500 words, it couldn't fit all of that in. So it would only use the most recent 1,500. Now that's expanded to about, I think GPT these days is 128,000 tokens. So that's probably going to be about 50,000 words, 60,000 words or so. But the way that journalist was using this was expecting it to have stored weeks worth of transcripts of podcasts, which would be way beyond that token. So he was complaining that it had generated this latest podcast transcript that didn't exist, but it listed like at least 2 weeks of podcasts that it said that he could access. And I presume if he ever asked to get the transcripts back about the earlier ones, it would make those up as well, because even if in his chat history all of those transcripts are there, there's only a limited window to fit them in. So anything that's too old will just fall off the top of the list and won't even be available. So it would probably, if he'd asked it for the middle of April's or something like that, it would have done the same thing. It just would have made it up. And it probably would have been quite plausible again. Like, he said in his video that it all looked believable. It had the right kind of greetings, but then 20 seconds in, it just went to a random topic that they hadn't talked about. And a way I like to look at it is to think about how these AIs are trained. And when they're trained, these tokens that I talked about a couple of minutes ago, those tokens that are fed in are not word fragments or words. They're actually just integers. They're numbers. So every token, every part of a word gets broken down into chunks, and those chunks are given a number value. And then the AI, when it's trained with this massive data, is just fed all of these integers. And what it's doing is it's learning when do these numbers turn up near each other? And are there other numbers that turn up at the same time nearby? And it draws a massive map of the connections between these numbers. And then when you ask it a question, your question is turned into numbers as well. And so the AI sees a list of numbers, and then it's asked to guess what are the next numbers that come in this sequence. And there's some extra smarts that goes on with this, but that's the basis of what's going on with LLM. So it's not reading words. And then once it's guessed those numbers, that goes through another piece of software that converts them back to words, and you see the words that come out of GPT or Google's AI or Anthropic. But inside the machinery, it's all just numbers being processed.
So it's made for good telly when Sam Coates turned it back on again in conversation mode and chatted to ChatGPT, who he said was responding in a voice he interpreted as like some sort of 30-year-old friendly hipster from London, and confronted it saying, hey, you've hallucinated stuff I hadn't done and misled me. And the thing it literally did in that voice apologise, said, yeah, sorry about that, results can vary. Can't kind of blame Sam Coates for thinking
it's a believable, convincing set of words that it's pumping out, but that doesn't mean it's thinking about it. And what it said, as well as saying I'm sorry, it said I won't do it again, and here are the steps I will take to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's not going to happen. Like the conversations that people have with these AIs, that doesn't go into the training for later on. Within that one single conversation that you have, as long as that text is in the context window, it will bear that in mind, because every time that you ask a follow-up question to an AI, it reads the entire conversation, which is what gives you the illusion that it's remembered what you're saying and there's a continuity of conversation. But all that's happening is that your prompt is getting bigger and bigger, not just with your questions, but with the AI's previous answers as well. So all of that becomes the pattern. So the pattern becomes bigger and bigger. And if that pattern involves something about not lying and not deceiving, then obviously that means that the things that it matches to will be more likely to not lie, you'd hope, because there's some kind of concept of truth there and not giving out stuff that's just trying to be helpful. That's what's giving you the illusion that you're having a full conversation with an AI.
So that friendly 30-something sounding hipster will be totally amnesiac next time he flips it on.
Absolutely, and will probably be quite neutral sounding. I mean, given how Sam talks to it, it will reflect the same tone of voice most likely. And especially when you ask an AI to give an answer in a certain tone of voice, it's fairly good at doing that. But yeah, you go for a fresh conversation. It might be a server this time in a different part of the world that, you've never connected to that server before. It has no history of talking with you.
And so we sort of have to understand this if we get to the point where media start creating content using this stuff, if they try to do an explainer and actually use the technology to do it. We have to remember this machine is working on one task, and even if it sounds like a human with a memory bank, it really isn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and as I said, clicking on links would be a good start. But if you're going to use the AI summary, at least read the basics elsewhere outside of AI and make sure that you understand so that you can pick up on those simple mistakes that AI can make.
Just finally, can you trust a skeptic after midnight?
Yeah, I think so. Like sometimes at our Skeptics in the Pub meetings, we're still there after midnight. And much as the conversation might devolve a little bit, I'd like to think we're still rational after midnight.
That was Mark Honeychurch from the NZ Skeptics, and he was putting Google Search's AI-driven overview service to the test and finding out there are some questions that it really doesn't want to answer, and the media should be wary. And while it might look like those AI tools are trying to tell us what we want to hear and even apologising for it if they fail, well, they're not really doing that. Well, Hayden, having heard all that, do you now feel any better about AI possibly being set up to try and tell you what you want to hear?
You know what, Colin? I don't.
Okay, that's it for this weekend. Thanks for listening. If you have any thoughts for us or ideas for us to follow up, do get in touch. Email us at mediawatch@rnz.co.nz. You'll also find us at MediawatchNZ on X, and you can even write us an old-fashioned letter and send it to Mediawatch, PO Box 123, Wellington. Hayden, you'll be back next Wednesday with Midweek Mediawatch, right?
I will be.
International events permitting?
Hopefully, petrol prices will be under $3.
Catch you then. Okay. In the meantime, follow Mediawatch and listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast app to make sure you never miss an episode.